I want to begin with the ship, not with the family, not with the money. With the ship, because the ship is the only thing in this story everyone agrees existed. She left a northern harbor in the autumn of 1912. She was a sealing vessel, reinforced, old, the kind of hull that had already survived ice. She carried a crew the records do not name and a cargo the manifest does not describe. She sailed south into the Antarctic winter, into the season when no sane captain sailed, and she went without a flag of science and without a word to any newspaper. She came back in the spring with one man aboard. One. His name was Lars Sundby. He was a deckhand. He was 24 years old, born in 1888 in a fishing village, whose name his letter spells 3 different ways, and when the ship returned, he could no longer feel 2 fingers of his right hand. The frostbite had taken them, the cold had taken the rest of the crew, and whatever the ship had carried south, it did not carry north again. I have spent a long time with Sundby's letter. I want to be careful with you about what it is and what it is not. It is not proof of treasure. It is not a confession of crime. It is a letter from a frightened young man to his older brother written. The letter says, "So that one of us will know." The letter records a name for the family that financed the voyage. I am not going to repeat that name as fact, because Sundby's letter is the only document that carries it, and a single grieving sailor is not a court. But you know the name. It is in the title of this film. It is one of the oldest and most documented banking names in Europe, a family that the historical record shows controlled the largest private fortune in the world for most of the 19th century. Sundby's letter records that this family paid for the ship. The maritime register records that the ship existed, and then, somewhere between those two facts, the entire voyage disappears. That is the gap I want to walk you into, not a theory, a gap. A hole in the record exactly the shape of a ship that sailed, returned with one man, and was never written about again. One man came home, he buried what he saw inside a letter, and the letter was itself buried for 86 years in a drawer. So, before we go any further, I have to ask the question that haunts everything that follows. Where did the rest of them go? If you have ever stood at the edge of a record and felt the cold air coming up out of the missing pages, stay with me, because this is one of those stories where the silence is the evidence. This is the buried empire, and what the ice held, the financing family wanted held forever. But the ice does not keep secrets the way men do. The ice keeps them better. I need you to understand the stakes before I show you the letter, because the stakes are the reason this story was buried, and not simply forgotten. A forgotten story is one nobody cared about. A buried story is one somebody worked to keep down. What I am going to lay in front of you is a documented voyage with no documented purpose, financed by documented wealth, ending in a documented death toll, and followed by a silence that someone maintained. Every piece of that sentence can be checked. The purpose cannot. The purpose is the buried thing. And here is what I am asking of you. I am asking you to follow the record with me and refuse to fill the gap with whatever you already believe. The men who funded this voyage are counting on you to do exactly that, to leap, to invent, to discredit yourself with a wild guess so that the careful, documented, terrifying truth can be waved away alongside it. I will not do that. I will only tell you what Sundby's letter records and what the manifest lists. If you want to walk the whole length of this with me, the doorway, the witness, what he saw, the chamber in the ice, and the pattern of other ships that vanished the same way, then subscribe. Not for me, for Lars Sundby, who wrote it all down with 3 working fingers and asked only that one person would know. Let one person be you now, the doorway. Everything I am about to tell you came through a single door, and that door opened by accident in 1998 in a maritime museum on the Norwegian coast. I will not name the museum, for reasons that will become obvious. The museum ran, as many do, a program of public donations, families bringing in the relics of seafaring grandfathers, the sextants and the logbooks, and the photographs of men standing on decks that have long since rotted. Most of it is catalogued, thanked for, and shelved. A great deal of it is never read. In the spring of 1998, an elderly woman donated a box of her family's papers. Her grandfather had been a fisherman. Among the papers, the baptismal records, the ordinary sediment of an ordinary northern family, was a letter, folded 8 times, brittle at the creases, written in a cramped and difficult hand. It was addressed from Lars Sundby to his brother. The museum's intake records, which I have seen described, note that the letter was set aside as personal correspondence, low research value. It was filed. It sat. A volunteer archivist, years later, reading through the low-value box for a project on regional dialect, found the letter strange enough to flag. It was strange because of what it described. It described a ship that the volunteer could not find in the standard registers of the heroic age of Antarctic exploration, and the volunteer knew those registers because the great expeditions of that period are some of the most documented voyages in human history. The Belgica, the Discovery, the Nimrod, the Terra Nova, Mawson's Aurora, the Endurance, every one of them named, dated, photographed, written into 100 books. Sundby's ship is in none of them. But Sundby's letter describes the same ocean, the same season, the same brutal coast, and a voyage that the historical record, the most exhaustively recorded period of polar exploration ever undertaken, somehow does not contain. That is the doorway, a low-value letter in a donated box describing a voyage that should be famous and is instead absent. I want to be honest about the chain of custody, because honesty is the only thing that separates me from the men who buried this. The letter passed from Sundby to his brother, from the brother down through a fishing family for 3 generations, into a museum donation in 1998, onto a low-value shelf, into the hands of a curious volunteer. That is a long chain. Every link is human. Any link could be wrong, but here is what makes me trust it. The letter does not boast. It does not claim treasure. It does not name a place you could sail to and dig. It is the opposite of the documents people forge. It is small, ashamed, and specific. It records frostbite. It records the names of dead men. It records a young man's fear that he had taken part in something he did not understand, and would be punished for surviving. Forgers write glory. Sundby wrote grief. So let me bring you to him. Let me bring you to the witness. Lars Sundby was not an explorer. I want that to be the first thing you know about him, because the men who later erased this voyage would have liked you to imagine someone unreliable, a dreamer, a drunk, a teller of tales. He was none of those things. He was a deckhand, a laborer of the sea. His letter is the letter of a man who worked with his hands and distrusted words, which is exactly why his words are worth so much. He was born in 1888, the second son of a fishing family on the northern coast. His brother, the older one, the one the letter is written to, inherited the boat. Lars inherited nothing. That is an old story in the north, and it is the story that put him on the docks looking for a berth in the autumn of 1912. His letter records how he came to sign on. A man, Sundby calls him the agent, never a name, was hiring crew in the harbor for a southern voyage. The pay was extraordinary. Sundby writes that it was 3 times what a sealing berth paid half in advance, in coin, in his hand. For a second son with nothing, 3 times the wage in advance was not an offer. It was a rescue. He asked what the voyage was for. The agent Sundby's letter records said, "South, for the company. You will be told the rest when you are needed to know it. No announced purpose, no flag, no newspaper, just coin and a direction." And here I have to tell you something that I have turned over for a long time, because it is the human center of this whole story. Sundby knew it was wrong. He says so. He writes to his brother that he knew an honest voyage announces itself, that a voyage with money like that and silence like that was a voyage with a closed mouth. He writes that their father would not have let him go. He went anyway. He went because he was poor, and because he was young, and because 3 times the wage in advance is a thing a hungry man takes, and reasons with afterward. I do not judge him for it. I think most of us, at 24, with nothing, would have taken the coin too. That is how these voyages are crewed, not with villains, with the poor who are paid enough not to ask. The crew, his letter records, was a mixed lot. Norwegians like himself, a few Scots, men who had been south before, on the real expeditions, and who knew the ice. Captain Sundby describes as a hard, silent man who carried sealed orders and opened them at sea. And there were others aboard who were not crew at all. Sundby calls them the company's men. 2 of them, who did no work, gave no orders, and watched. 2 men who watched. Remember them. The voyage south, Sundby writes, was ordinary in its misery, the cold, the sickness, the endless gray water turning to gray ice. He describes the frostbite beginning, the first numbness in the fingers that he ignored because a deckhand who cannot work is a deckhand who is not paid. He describes the death of the first crewman, a Scot, of something in the lungs, buried at sea with a stone sewn into the canvas to take him down. He describes the captain opening the sealed orders, and then his letter records, the ship turned, not toward the great known coast, where the famous expeditions had their huts and their depots, away from it, toward an island the captain had coordinates for and Sundby had never heard named. We went where no one goes, the letter says, to a place the company already knew. A place the company already knew. That is the line I cannot get out of my head, because the heroic age of Antarctic exploration, the period this voyage sailed into, was defined by men risking their lives to reach places no one had ever been. And here is a privately financed ship sailing not to discover an island, but to return to one, to a place its owners already knew. You do not return to a place you have not first been, which means there was an earlier voyage. Sundby could not have known that. He was a deckhand. He knew only what his frostbitten hands touched and what his eyes saw when the ship finally dropped anchor in the lee of an island that no flag had ever claimed. So now I will tell you what he saw. This is the heart of it. This is the part of the letter that the volunteer archivist flagged, the part that turns a sad story about a poor sailor into something that the financing family would have paid a great deal to keep in a low-value box forever. I am going to attribute every line of this. I am not going to tell you what was on that island. I am going to tell you only what Sundby's letter records that he saw. Hold on to the difference. The difference is the whole thing. The ship anchored in the lee of the island, his letter records in water black and still, sheltered from the wind by cliffs of ice. Sundby writes that the island was small, and that its center was rock, not ice, bare dark stone rising out of the white, which the men who had sailed south before said was unusual, that most of this coast was ice all the way down, bare rock, a place a thing could be put and stay. The unloading began at once, his letter records in a hurry, in the brief light. The crew was set to it under the eyes of the captain and the 2 company men, and here Sundby's account becomes precise, in the way only a working man's account becomes precise. He counted the loads, because counting loads was his job. The manifest, he writes, listed the cargo as stores and equipment. What he carried ashore was not stores and equipment. He carried crates, heavy ones, banded in iron with no markings, no shipping marks, no port stamps, no company name, which Sundby notes was itself strange, because every honest crate in the world is marked. These crates were blank. Crates that some were so heavy that 4 men could barely move them on the rollers, heavier than stores have any right to be. Heavy as if filled with stone, or with metal, or with metal. I am not going to finish that thought for you. Sundby did not finish it either. He only weighed it with his hands and wrote down what his hands felt. The crates went up the dark rock to a place the company men directed, and there his letter records was the thing that no manifest can explain, a chamber, cut into the ice or into the rock beneath the ice. Sundby was not sure which, because he was not allowed close. A chamber with a sealed door, already built, already there, from a voyage before this one. The company men had a key. Sundby writes that he saw the door open, that the dark inside breathed out cold, and that the crates were carried in, and the door sealed again, and that one of the company men stood over the sealing the way a man stands over a grave, to be sure the dead stay down. A sealed chamber built on an earlier voyage, opened with a key, filled with unmarked crates heavy as metal, and sealed again on a bare rock island the financing family owned but no chart records. That is what Sundby's letter records. Now I have to tell you the rest, because the rest is why only one man came home. The work was done in a few days, and then, his letter records, the dying began in earnest, not from the work, but from the cold and the lateness of the season. They had sailed too late, the ice was closing. The captain had cut it too fine, Sundby believes, because the company men had wanted the chamber sealed before another expedition could come near that coast, and the men paid for that haste with their lives. The ship was caught. Sundby's account of the months that followed is the hardest thing in the letter to read, and I will not dwell on it, because he was a man and not a story. The cold took them one at a time, the Scot who had buried the first Scot, the men who had sailed south before, the captain with his sealed orders, frozen at his own table, and the two company men, and this is the detail Sundby returns to, the detail he cannot understand. The two company men, who died like everyone else, with their papers held against their chests, as if the papers would keep them warm. The papers, he writes, he could not read. He took them anyway, from a dead man's frozen hands, because I thought one of us should carry out what we carried in. When the ice finally broke in the spring, Sundby was the last man alive aboard a ship of the dead. He could work the sails barely, with a crew of 1 and 3 fingers, and he turned her north by guess and by the cold sun, and somehow, this part is barely believable and entirely human, somehow he brought her home. One man, a ship of the dead, a bundle of papers he could not read, and a memory of a sealed door breathing cold on an island no one had named. He ends that section of the letter with a single line, and I am going to read it to you exactly, because it is the line the whole film turns on. I do not know what we buried, Sundby wrote. I only know they did not want it found, and they did not want us to live to say where. That is what he saw. Now let me show you what survived, because a deckhand's letter, however true it sounds, is not an anchor. It is a man's word. And I promised you I would not ask you to believe a man's word alone. So I have to ask, what physical thing outside the letter can be touched? The first is the manifest. Sundby's letter does not contain the manifest, but it describes it precisely, and the description matters. He writes that the cargo was entered as stores and equipment, a phrase, a category, and here the historical record helps us, because the registration of vessels and the filing of cargo manifests in northern ports in 1912 was a documented bureaucratic process. Ships were registered, voyages were entered. A privately financed vessel sailing from a northern harbor would have left a paper wake. The maritime register of the period records the vessel, a sealing ship of the right tonnage, reinforced for ice, owned not by a man but by a company, a shipping concern of the kind that the great banking houses used to hold assets at one remove. The register records that she sailed, the register records that she returned. The register does not record where she went. That blank is not nothing. That blank is the manifest silence made official. A voyage was filed with a destination of sealing grounds, southern, not Antarctica, not an island. Sealing grounds, southern, a phrase as empty as stores and equipment. Two empty phrases, one for the cargo and one for the destination, exactly where the truth should be. The second physical thing is the photograph. Sundby's letter records that there was a camera aboard, that one of the company men used it, and that he photographed the island, the chamber, and the crates. Photography on the heroic age expeditions is one of the great glories of the period. The images of the Endurance crushed in the ice, of Mawson's haggard face, of Scott's doomed party at the pole. Those photographs survive. They are some of the most famous images ever made. The photographs from Sundby's voyage do not survive. His letter records why. He writes that when the ship returned, before he was even allowed off her, men came aboard. The company's men, new ones, and took the camera and the plates and the captain's sealed orders and the bundle of papers he had taken from the dead. They took everything that could be read or seen. They did not take the letter. They did not take the letter because they did not know it existed. Sundby wrote it after, alone, ashore, and he did not send it through any post they could watch. His letter records that he carried it himself to his brother and put it in his brother's hand, and said the letter says, "Do not read this until I am at sea again, and do not speak of it ever." So the manifest silence survives in a public register. The photograph does not survive because it was confiscated. And the only thing that survived intact, the only uncontrolled witness, is the letter itself, because it was the one thing the company did not know to take. What survives, in other words, is exactly the pattern you would expect if Sundby told the truth. The official record kept but emptied, the visual record seized, the private record overlooked. That is not the pattern of a man inventing a tale. A man inventing a tale produces evidence. This produced only absence, official absence, deliberate absence, the absence that has a shape. And the shape is the shape of the chamber, sealed, emptied of meaning, holding its cold. I want to step back now and place this voyage inside the world it sailed in, because the strangeness of Sundby's account depends entirely on understanding how documented this period was. The years from 1897 to 1917 are called the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. Historians use that exact phrase. In that span, by the standard count, 16 major expeditions sailed south from 8 different nations. I have already named some of them. The Belgica under de Gerlache, frozen in the ice in 1898. Scott's Discovery, 1901. Shackleton's Nimrod, 1907, turning back 97 miles from the pole. Amundsen reaching the pole in 1911. Scott reaching it and dying in 1912, the same year Sundby sailed. Mawson's Australasian Antarctic Expedition, 1911 to 1914, aboard the Aurora. Shackleton's Endurance, crushed in the ice, the most famous survival story in exploration. Every one of those expeditions is documented to the hour. We know the crew lists. We know the dogs' names. The heroic age is not a dark period. It is one of the brightest lit periods in the history of exploration, because the men who undertook it understood that the record was the point, and the funding of those expeditions is documented too. This is the part that matters most. The great expeditions were chronically, desperately short of money. Mawson's expedition cobbled together around £38,000 from governments, scientific societies, and private donors, and still ended in debt. By Mawson's own accounting, a deficit of over £4,000 when the ship and equipment were sold off. These voyages begged for money. They held public lectures. They named mountains after donors to flatter the next check out of a rich man's hand. Now hold that picture in your mind. Explorers begging. Whole nations debating whether the prestige was worth the cost. And then a single private company, holding its money behind a shipping name, quietly fits out a reinforced vessel, pays its crew 3 times the going rate in advance, in coin, and sends it south in the wrong season to an island it already knows, with a cargo it will not describe to a chamber it has already built. That is not exploration. Exploration is poor and loud. This was rich and silent. And the family whose name Sundby's letter records as the source of the money, I will say it once more carefully, is a family the historical record places at the center of European finance for a century, a family that controlled the largest private fortune in the world, a family whose entire genius, the historians agree, was the movement and the holding and the hiding of value across borders through private couriers, faster and quieter than any rival, the movement of gold, the holding of assets, the keeping of things in places where others could not reach them. Here is my refusal, and I make it plainly. I am not telling you that this family hid their fortune in the Antarctic ice. I have no document that says so. The leap from a banking family that hides value to a banking family that buried its value at the bottom of the world is a leap, and I will not make it for you, and I beg you not to make it for me. What I am telling you is narrower and colder. A privately financed ship sailed south in 1912. Its purpose was never announced. Its destination was filed as a lie. Its cargo was filed as a lie. Its photographs were confiscated. Its crew died but one. And the one survivor's letter records that the money came from a family whose documented business was the hiding of value. I am not closing that gap. I am only standing at the edge of it and refusing to look away. Now, how does a voyage like this vanish? How does a ship sail from a real harbor, register a real departure, and leave no story? Sundby's letter, read against the historical record, shows the method. And the method is almost boring, which is how you know it is real, because real suppression is never dramatic. It is administrative. First, you control the paper at the source. The voyage is registered because an unregistered ship draws attention, but it is registered with empty phrases. Sealing grounds southern, stores and equipment. The record exists so that no one asks why it does not exist. It is a decoy made of truth. Second, you control the men. The crew of a sealing voyage are not famous. They are the poor of the docks, hired one season, scattered the next. A crew that dies at sea scatters itself, and a crew that died as Sundby's did, all but one, needs no scattering at all. The dead keep the closest mouths. Sundby's letter records his own dread of this, that the company would prefer him dead, that a sole survivor is a loose end, that he survived only because the ice did the company's work imperfectly and left one man standing where it should have left none. Third, you seize the record that cannot lie, the photographs, the orders, the papers from the dead men's hands. Sundby watched the company's new men take all of it the moment the ship touched home. An image is dangerous in a way a rumor is not. So the images went into the family's papers, and the family's papers, the historical record shows, were always private, always controlled, a banking dynasty's archive being the most closely held thing in the world. And fourth, the cruelest and the simplest, you do nothing, you let time work. A poor deckhand with 3 fingers and a story no register supports is a man no one believes. He has no photograph, he has no manifest, he has no body to point to. He has only his word, and the word of the poor is the cheapest thing there is. The company did not need to silence Sundby. The world silenced him for free by not listening. His letter records that he tried once to tell. He went to a man he thought might believe him, an official of some kind, and the man heard him out and asked for proof, and Sundby had none, and the man told him to go home and stop drinking. Sundby was not drinking, but that is what is said to a poor man with an impossible truth, and the door of the record closes gently with a click that is mistaken for kindness. So Sundby went home, he wrote the letter, he gave it to his brother. He told his brother not to read it, and he went back to sea, to ordinary sealing, ordinary fishing, and ordinary northern life, carrying inside him the one thing he could never prove, until the letter outlived him and surfaced in a donated box in 1998, 86 years too late to save him and exactly in time to reach you. That is how a voyage vanishes, not in a single dramatic act, in 4 quiet administrative ones, and then in 86 years of no one listening. And here is the thing that turns my stomach when I read it back. It worked. It worked completely. If that elderly woman had kept her grandfather's box, if the volunteer had not read the low-value shelf, if the dialect project had never existed, Lars Sundby would be nothing, not even a footnote, because footnotes require a record, and his record was emptied at the source. He was almost successfully erased. Almost. Now I have to ask whether this was the only one, because a method this clean is rarely used once. And when I went looking carefully, refusing to leap, I found that the heroic age, for all its documentation, is also an age of ships that vanished, of expeditions that sailed and did not return, of crews swallowed whole by the ice and the dark. Most of those vanishings are tragedy, not conspiracy. I will not pretend otherwise. But the pattern of the privately financed voyage with an unannounced purpose is real, and it recurs, and the recurrence is what I want to lay beside Sundby. Consider the era's role of the lost. In 1912, the same year Sundby sailed south, the Russian expedition of Georgy Brusilov sailed north into the Arctic aboard the St. Anna, into the Kara Sea, and was caught in the ice. The expedition vanished almost without a trace. Of the entire crew, 2 men survived, walking south across the drifting ice, the navigator and a single sailor. Their fate was unknown for decades. Remains and a log dated 1913 were not found until 2010 on the shores of Franz Josef Land. A voyage swallowed whole, a near total death toll, and the truth surfacing nearly a century late from the ice. The parallel is not the place. The parallel is the shape. A ship gone, a story gone, and the record returning only when the ice gave it back. Consider Georgy Sedov, whose ship, the St. Foka, rescued the 2 Brusilov survivors, and who himself died in 1914 driving north toward the pole, his own expedition financed in part by private money, raised in haste and chronically short. A privately backed polar voyage, a death, a controversy over who had paid and why. Consider the great documented expeditions that nonetheless lost their men into the white, the parties that walked out from the huts and did not walk back, the bodies the ice keeps to this day in chambers it carved itself. The heroic age was an age of natural sealed chambers. The continent makes them. It made one for Scott's party, and one for Mawson's lost companions, and one for every man the ice took and held. And here is the question that the pattern forces, the question I cannot answer, and will not pretend to. If the ice itself buries men so easily, so completely, so permanently, if the continent's entire nature is the keeping of what is placed in it, then how perfect a vault it would be for someone who wished to bury not a man, but a thing, not a body, but an asset. A place where the cold does the guarding for free, where no register reaches, where a sealed chamber on a bare rock island would outlast every government and every war and every revolution that might come for a banking family's wealth. I am not saying that is what happened. I want to be exact, because the men who buried this are counting on my being inexact. I am saying that the method that erased Sundby's voyage, the empty manifest, the seized photographs, the dead crew, the 86 years of silence, is a method, not an accident, and that a method gets used more than once, and that the only reason we know about this one is a folded letter in a donated box. For every Sundby who somehow lived and wrote, how many wrote nothing? For every box donated to a curious volunteer, how many were thrown away? The pattern is not a list of proven crimes. The pattern is a list of perfect opportunities. Each one a ship sailed south with money behind it and silence around it, into a continent built to keep secrets, in an age when the rich begged the poor to die for prestige, and one company, just one, paid the poor to die for something it would not name. That is the pattern. I lay it beside Sundby and I let you feel the weight of it. And then I take it away again, because a pattern is not a proof, and I will not sell you a proof I do not have. So let me be as plain as I know how to be. I am not telling you that the Rothschilds buried gold in the Antarctic ice. I do not have that proof. I have never had it. No one has shown it to me, and I have not found it. And if anyone tells you I claimed it, they are lying or they did not listen. I am not telling you what was in the crates. Sundby did not know. He felt their weight and wrote, as if filled with stone or with metal, and that is a frostbitten man's guess with his hands, not a fact, and I will not turn his guess into your certainty. I am not telling you the chamber is still there, full, waiting. I do not know that. Ice moves. Coasts change. A century has passed. The island may be under the sea by now, or under new ice, or emptied long ago by men with better keys than the dead company men carried. Here is what I am telling you, and only this. A privately financed ship sailed into the Antarctic in 1912. Its purpose was never announced. That is the absence of a record. Its destination and cargo were filed in empty phrases. That is a documented practice of the period, the empty manifest. Its crew died but one. Its survivor's letter, surfaced in 1998 in a maritime-museum donation, records that the money came from one of the most documented banking families in history, a family whose business the historians agree was the hiding and moving of value, and the official record of that family, like the official record of the voyage, is exactly as silence can be made by people who own the paper, a documented voyage, a missing purpose, a controlled record. That is the whole of my claim, and it is enough. It is more than enough, because you do not need me to fill the gap. The gap, left open and honest, is more frightening than anything I could put into it. A ship sailed south with the money of the richest family in the world, to a place it already knew, with a cargo it would not name, and came back with one man. And then the world was arranged so that you would never hear of it. You are hearing of it now. That today is the only thing that has changed, not the proof. The hearing. Let me bring you back to Lars Sundby, because he deserves to be the last man standing in this story, the way he was the last man standing on that ship. I have called him a deckhand. I have called him poor and young and afraid. I have told you that he took the coin when he should have refused it, and I do not take that back, because it is true, and because he wrote it himself, in shame, in his own hand. But I want to defend him now, at the end, because no one ever did. He was a man who carried out what he carried in. He took the dead company man's papers from frozen hands not to profit, but because, he wrote, one of us should carry out what we carried in. He sailed a ship of corpses north alone with 3 fingers, because the alternative was to lie down and join them, and he did not lie down. And when he came home to a world that took his camera and his papers and his proof and then told him to stop drinking, he did the only thing a powerless man can do against a power that owns the record. He wrote it down. He wrote it down knowing it would not be believed. He wrote it down knowing it might cost him his life if the company learned of it. He wrote it down and hid it in the one place they would never look, not a vault, not an official, but his own brother's hand, with the instruction not to read it. He buried his testimony the way they buried their crates, in a sealed place against a future that might one day open it, and the future did open it, 86 years late, by accident, by the curiosity of a volunteer reading a low-value shelf for a project about how northern people spoke. The company controlled the manifest. The company seized the photographs. The company let time and poverty do the rest. They buried the voyage as completely as a thing can be buried by men who own the paper. But they did not destroy it. They could not. They did not know it existed. The letter slipped through the one gap their method left. The private, the overlooked, the unprofitable, the human. And that is the thing I keep coming back to, the thing this whole film is built on, the thing I want you to carry out of here the way Sundby carried the papers out of the ice. The archive was never destroyed, it was only buried. The archive was never destroyed, it was only buried. What is buried can be found, a box can be donated, a volunteer can be curious. A letter can outlive both the man who wrote it and the men who wanted it gone. Suppression is not the same as erasure. Suppression is only a deeper kind of burial, and the deep keeps things, the cold keeps things, the ice keeps things, until the season turns and the surface gives them back. They sent one man home by accident. He has been waiting in a drawer for you. Next time, I am going to take you somewhere warmer, and in its way, far worse. Because this time, the buried thing is not crates on a rock island, but a man alive and dying in a bed, and the record of him. I am going to tell you about a nurse who was ordered to erase the medical file of a dying giant. A man whose body was a kind of evidence, a man powerful interests needed unwritten before he was even cold. She kept what she was told to burn, and what she kept does not match the story the world was given. Until then, remember the deckhand with 3 fingers. Remember that the richest family in the world once paid the poorest men in the world to die for a cargo it would not name, on an island no chart shows, in a chamber sealed against the future, and remember why that future could still arrive. The archive was never destroyed, it was only buried.